בוקר טוב, good morning, שבוע טוב. As we are on י"ז בתמוז, I thought it would be appropriate that we would try to find in the time frame that we are speaking about in the last few shiurim, which is the 18th century, to find a figure and an event that has a connection to י"ז בתמוז. And the Mishnah tells us in Masechet Ta'anit that 5 bad things happened on י"ז בתמוז. The most known of them, of course, is the breaking of the walls of Yerushalayim. But one of the other events is the Mishnah tells us that a certain man named Apostamus, which seems to be one of the Roman prefects that were ruling the land. So one of them named Apostamus had burned the Torah. And what is interesting is that we found in 1758 a case of burning of the Talmud in, I wrote it in Levov, it's in Kamenitz. Rabbi Chaim Hacoehn Rapoport was from Levov. The burning was in Kamenitz, and it was a very shocking event for the Polish Jews of the time. And I hope to be able to expand a little on this event and speak about it and about the man that was trying to prevent it, which is Rabbi Chaim Hacoehn Rapoport. Let's just for a second turn off the lights. I think that's better. What you can see here, that's a picture of the responsa published by Rabbi Chaim Hacoehn. And here you can see that's like a drawing from the time in a book that was printed by Rabbi Yaakov Emdin, about whom we already spoke in recent shiurim. So in one of his, I think I mentioned that he was publishing almost every week. And in one of his books, he was, in more than one of his books, he was writing about this event. And he also had drawings in some of his books. And this is a drawing from a book that he printed more or less at the same time. These are the Christian priests with the burning books of the Talmud that you can see here. Okay, so let's begin. Excuse me. Rabbi Chaim Hacoehn Rapoport was born in Hey Kislev, Shnat Hey Tav Samech, which is 1700. So he was born in 1700 in a city named Hudna in Poland. Nowadays it's called Girudna. It's in Belarus. It was called during the last few hundred years. It was called Hudna, Hudni, Gironda, Girondi. These are Yiddish names and Polish names and Ukrainian names and Belarusian names. But it's the same city. It's a very small, Jewish-speaking. It's a small town. It's a shtetl. His father was Rabbi Simcha Hacoehn Rapoport, a famous rabbi. He was the rabbi of the city of Hudna, and he came from a line of rabbanim. So that's another elite rabbinical family. In 1714, so he is 14 years old, and his father went to become the rabbi in a place named Lublin, a much bigger city. So that was, we may say, an advancement in the career of the father. Another 4 years passed by, and in 1718, his father he's being appointed as the Rav of Levov. So he's now he's coming from Lublin to Levov. Again, to us sitting here, Lublin and Levov may sound just the same thing, but it says Gadera and Chadera. Maybe the names are similar, these are completely different places. So he's coming from from Lublin to Levov, and that's, again, it's a bigger Jewish city, it's a more chashuv position. Unfortunately, on his way, he passes away, he's niftar. We speak about the father in a city named Sheberchin. Now, there is a small story, interesting story behind the passing of his father in this small city. And that's a tradition that went in the family. And now, according to that's a picture of the book from which I took the family tradition. I will tell you the story in my own words. So according to the story, one of the forefathers of the Rapoport family was a person named the Maharam Lublin. He was a very important rabbi in the 16th century. So 200 years before, the Maharam Lublin. Now, the Maharam Lublin was a very important rabbi in Lublin, which was in the time the major city of all of the cities around it, of the area, including this place named Shebershin. Okay, the place where now the father died. So the Maharam Lublin was the chief rabbi of the whole area. Now, again, so you have to keep in your mind. So we have returned to the 16th century. And this Maharam Lublin decides to call in all the rabbis of the small towns around and make sure that everyone is appropriate in his position. And he calls all these small rabbis, and then obviously everyone comes. He's the Gadol Ador, he's the most important rabbi of the generation, so everyone come. And there is only one rabbi that does not come, and this is a certain Rabbi David from Cheberchin, who decides that why would the Maharam Lublin call him? He doesn't owe anything to the Maharam Lublin. So he stays at home. The Maharam sends another message saying that if you would not come, then I would make sure that you would be fired from your position in Cheberchin. Then this Rabbi David is, okay, fine. He understands that he has no other choice. He comes to the Maharam Lublin, and he comes for Shabbat. And throughout the whole Shabbat, every time the Maharams give a drasha or a shiur, then he would raise his hand, and he has questions, and he's trying to ruin the drasha and the shiur of the Maharam Lublin. In the end, in Motzei Shabbos, he comes to say his farewells, and the Maharam Lublin says, you know, the way that you acted is really inappropriate, and you'd go back home, but know that you'll be punished by heavens. And Rabbi David says, you know, here you are the rabbi, so I accept the judgment that you gave me, the verdict, but one day one of your children or grandchildren would pass through my city where I am the Rav, and then the language is, Im yavo mi mitzetzaav le'iri, if one of your grandchildren would come to my city, az eda ma la'asot, I will know what to do. Okay, and then he comes back home, and in the same year, he passes away. Now, fast forward almost 200 years, less, 120 years, and we have this Rabbi Simcha Rapoport, right, the father of our hero, and he is one of the descendants of the Maharam Lublin, and he passes through the city, through Chebershin, on his way to become the rabbi of Levov. And when he's there, he's sleeping there. He doesn't know of the whole story, but he dreams, at night he sleeps and he has a dream. And in the dream, this Rabbi David comes to him and tells him the whole story. He says, you know, you are the descendant of the Maharam Lublin. I pay the price. Now it's your turn to pay the price. And suddenly, when he wakes up in the morning, the father calls his family or calls the people around, and he says, I would have to die here, but please bury me next to this Rabbi David. That was the rabbi of the city 150 years ago. And indeed, that's what happens. He becomes sick. He's not able to continue his journey. He dies there, and he's being buried next to the Rav, to this Rabbi David. Now, this story is some of the other stories that I will tell today. As I say sometimes, we are not sure about the historical accuracy, but they are beautiful stories. So that's the story, that's the tradition of the family. Now, our hero, Rabbi Chaim Hacoehn, is orphan. Right? So his father just died on his way. So he's orphan at the age of 18. 18 is the ripe age to get married. It's a little even late back then. So he's immediately getting married to a woman named Miriam, who also comes from a very chashuv rabbinical family. And in the age of 19, he becomes the rabbi of a small city, a small town, Jewish town named Jettel. Also there in the vicinity, in the area, is being known. He becomes famed as a gaon, as a genius. And he begins to give shuvot, or sponsor, in the most complex questions, including the highest order, you may say, of complexity, which is agunot, a rav that gives answers in the topic of agunot. What does it mean, agunot? That means women that the husband disappears. Many things can happen, even more in at their times, when you don't have telephone and don't have an ability to communicate, and people would sometimes go for the sake of their parnasa for long periods, and if something happens, no one would know. And then the woman comes to the rabbi, she wants to get remarried, and he has to somehow investigate what happened to the husband, and do we have enough information to permit her to remarry? These are considered the most complex questions, because a mistake, if you make a mistake, if you permit someone that is not to be permitted, that the husband is still alive, then the children from the new marriage would be mamzerim. And that's obviously that's a great tragedy. Or the other way around, if you are being machmir and you say, no, you cannot remarry while she can, you have just ruined the life of a woman. So it's a very complex issue. So he's already at the age of 19. He's answering. There are many rabbanim that throughout all of their life they would never answer a question in the topic of agunot, because it's just considered very complicated. And at the age of 19, we already have an answer from him on this topic. Let's read quickly the question, and only the bottom line. It's a very long answer. It's a few pages in the book. I just gave the question and the final answer. Nish'alti, says, I was asked, על דבר כבוד מורנו ורבנו הרב רבי ליפמן והרב רבי יעקב שהיה פנוי. So there was a certain male, a certain person, Liefman, that was פנוי. He was single, he was not married. והחזיק עצמו תמיד שאין לו אחים. And everyone around knew that he has no siblings, no brothers. ואחר כך נשא אישה, and then he married a wife, beautiful. ואחר הנישואין, so after getting married and before having, children, חלה את חוליו אשר מת בה. He became very sick, and it was clear that he's not going to survive. סמוך למיטתו שאלו הבריות אם יש לו אח שתזקק אשתו לו. Now, so he was known to have no siblings, but just to make sure, he was asked on his deathbed, do you have brothers? Because if you have brothers, so as you know, if someone dies and he has no children, but he has brothers, then the wife is supposed to get an ibum from one of the brothers of the niftar, of the late husband. Or if not, we are doing what is called chalitza, in which she's being exempt from the ibum, and then she can marry someone else. But you need to do the chalitza. So he was asked, are you sure that you have no brothers? And suddenly he says, hey Shiv, sheyesh lo ach. You know what? I do have a brother. אומנם מלאו לו זה 20 שנה מיום שראו בחיים. He says, the last time I saw him was 20 years ago, and I have no idea where he is. And you know, again, back then, someone can go, let's say, to America, and you have no way to reach him. No way at all. ומיום ההוא והלאה לא ראו, ואינו יודע אם הוא בחיים או לא. So 20 years there is no connection with this sibling. So they tried to convince him to give a get to his wife, so she would not be in a problem of having this doubt of a brother. And he accepted. He said, okay, I would give her a get. נתרצה לדבר, אבל מיד אחר חתימת העדים בגט, שבק האיש הנ"ל חייב לכל ישראל. But, so they signed the get, the divorce bill, but you know that in order for it to take effect, the husband has to give it to the wife. They signed the bill, the get, but he was not able to give it to his wife, and he was niftar before. So now she is stuck. Now she is stuck. ועתה אישה הנ"ל מרת נפש מתרפקת על שריות הדילה, so this wife is very sad, obviously, and she comes to me to give an hater, וצעירת ימימי, he says she's a young woman, you'll see in a few minutes, she was 17. Now he had a brother that he didn't see for 20 years, so I guess he was, yes, there was a big year gap there, but she was 17. And if she would get stuck now, that's a verdict for life. והקריבו אנשי העיר את משפטה אליי, כי העיר הזאת קרובה היא כמו שני פרסאות ביתי. So he says, she doesn't live in my city, in Jetel, in this small town, but she lives nearby. And I am he doesn't write that, he's an Anav, but I am the great rabbi of the area, so the complicated questions come to me. So they came to me, ואי אפשר לי למנוע מלחוות דעתי הקצרה, I must give my opinion even if it's short, והשם יעזרני לכוון ההלכה וכסבלה לבעשות. That's a 19-year-old guy writing this tshuva. I find it amazing, just amazing. I'm skipping the whole of the give and take of halacha, and we just get now the bottom line. So he says, אין לנו עיגון רב מזה, שהאישה בת 17 שנים, she's 17 years old. So he says, obviously that's an emergency. We have to use all the leniencies that we can use. אין לה אב ואם ושום קרוב. So she is 17 years old. She has no father or a mother. Now you can understand why she had to marry someone who is maybe 40 years older than her. והיא ענייה. Okay, so that's as low as you can get. That's as low. So right now she's an aguna, orphan, no relatives, and poor. לכן, מכל הניתמי, לפי דעתי הענייה והקצה, according to my humble opinion, מותרת האישה להתנסה בה לכל גבר. Again, I do not go into the halachic details, but basically he says because he was muhzak, so people knew him to have no siblings, and suddenly this brother just appeared from thin air, from nowhere. We do not really know if he lives or not, and so it seems that that's the way that he's trying to go. He says, so I'm permitting her to get married. אומנם איני מתירה עד שיסכימו איתי שני בעלי הוראה. That's a very common thing in Aguna. He says, I don't want to take all the responsibility on my shoulders. So she has to go to another two Rabbanim, get also their haskama, their agreement. And if you have three Rabbanim, then she's free to go. והחונן לאדם דעה ובינה ינחני בדרך נכונה. So God gives wisdom to men, would show me the right path. And then he gives a signature. חיים ואדוני אבי מורי ורבי הגאון מורי רבי שמחה כץ זכרו לחיי העולם הבא רפופורט חונה פה הקהילה הקדושה. So I camp here in the holy congregation. Zither, God will guard her and build it. היום יום ה' ג' תמוז. So it's interesting, the tshuva is from ג' תמוז, it's not far away from י"ז תמוז. תף Pei Tet. So Taf Pei Tet is 1719. 1719, as I said, he's 19 years old. Okay. At the year 1740, so now I, again, fast forwarded 21 years. He was 19, now he's 40. At the age of 40, he is getting an appointment to become the rabbi of Levov. You remember that his father, on his way to Levov to become the rabbi of Levov, passed away. So I'm sure that for him it was very emotional to be given the appointment to become the Rav of Levov. And he becomes the Rav there. Levov is a big city, so that's a very big difference from what he was doing in Jetel. And in Levov, he's becoming famous not only as a great genius, but also as the Hebrew word they use is takif. Takif means strong-minded. Rodef achar haemet. He's always chasing truth. And his answers in his response are characterized usually as very clear and very wide. So he's writing in a very clear fashion. We have to admit that not many of his responses survived. So if you compare him to other Rabbanim who lived in that era, such as the Noda B'Yehuda, Rabbi Yechezkel Landau, or Rabbi Yonatan Eibschitz, who spoke about, or the Khatam Sofer, was slightly younger than he was. So they are much better known today because they collected the responsa and printed it in multi-volumes books, so that they became very known. Now, he was no less of a genius maybe than me. I don't have the meter to measure, but can very certainly be that he was no less genius of who they were, but because he did not collect his responsa and very few were printed, then it did not have the same traction as there. So he's not a trademark, no name, Rabbi Chaim Hacoehn Rapoport. People know him, but we don't have from him as much as we have from these other Rabbanim. Nonetheless, he played a big role in the story that we are now about to tell. Before that, I wanted to give another few answers. So a few examples from the responses that did survive. An answer which is very interesting. A certain person, nish'alti al ish echad ushmo Mordechai ben Levi. So there was a certain person, Mordechai ben Levi, שעל ידי קטטה ומריבה שהייתה בינו ובין גיסו. So he was fighting with his brother-in-law. Now, fighting is somewhat of an understatement here. היכהו במקל על הראש. So this Mordechai took a stick, and I don't know if the stick is made of wood. It seems from wood. He took a stick and he hit him on the head. Now he said it was not שלא במקום המוח. So he didn't give it on the top of his head, but he gave it למעלה מן אוזנו בגובה הראש מן הצד. So above the ear in the temple. Now I do think that it's even more dangerous on the temple than on the top of the head, because the defense the skulls gives on the top of the head is better than from the side. But it seems that they didn't know that as well. So they thought it's a point in his favor that he gave the strike in a place which is not the brain itself. ואחר כך היכהו שנית בגופו. So it was not suffice to strike him on the head. He also struck him on his body. במקום שאין ראוי להמית בהכאת השם. He was not supposed to die. Now you can see that's a pre-shadowing, like what is going to happen. So the guy that writes the question says he was not supposed to die from these makot, from these hits. ואחר ההכאות הללו הלך המוכה על משענתו. So in the beginning he was still walking. ואחרי 2 או 3 שעות התחיל להתעלף ולהיות חלש. Only after 2 or 3 hours he began to feel sick. Now again, we can imagine that he caused some inner bleeding. And when there is chas v'chela inner bleeding, you may think in the beginning that nothing serious happened, because it takes time for the blood to build the pressure. So in the beginning, it seemed that nothing too bad happened. And then chazar leitano, and so he was feeling weak, and then he restood, וחזר לחלשותו, but then he weakened again, עד ששבק לן חיים. And the guy, this brother-in-law, passed away. והמכה ניגש אליי. So the Mordechai, right, the guy with the stick, now came to Rabbi Chaim Hacoehn Rapoport, לשאול על נפשו תקנה שיהיה לו כפרה. So that's a very interesting question. He comes, I don't know how the Kehila or how the law dealt with this guy. It seems that it somehow went under the radar or something, that he was not punished by the police or by the community. Maybe other people also were not very liking the brother-in-law. Be it as it may. So he's asking only one question: how can he be chozer b'tshuva? Now he killed his brother-in-law. He's trying to somehow take away from the terribleness of the event, because he says, I didn't hit him in a place in which he was supposed to die, and also it took a few hours, so maybe just died from some other thing. The answer given by Rabbi Chaim is the following. It's a very interesting answer. It's not your typical halachic answer. Wow, it's very long. So basically, I would say it's good to see. He says the man that died has orphans, and now Mordechai would have to sustain the children of the dead man. Just one thing. And also he says that's a reason why we should not be too strict on him on the repentance, because we need to enable him to sustain, to support the orphans. And also he has his own children. So he says, I would like to give him galut, but that would destroy the family of the deceased and his own family. So that's not an option in our case. He says, I cannot give him exile. What should we do? לכן בחנתי לו התשובה שנאמר מהרב מלובלין, שעל כל פנים, מוכרח ללך לשישה קהילות קדושות אשר סביבותיו, ולקבל שם מלכות ווידויים. So he says, you should go around. Pick 6 communities around. In every one of these 6 shuls, you should lie down, you should do a vidui, tell them what you have done, and then they would hit you. They would flag you. I flag you. So מלכות ווידוי. ולשכב תחת מפתן בית הכנסת בשעת יציאת בית הכנסת. You should lie on the, like the madrigot. The steps, thank you. The steps going down from the shul. And everyone coming out of shul would step on you or step over you. So that's a type of an embarrassment. And then, so you should do that. ולהתענות מדי יום ביום וגם כמה פעמים 3 ימים עם הלילות. So fast 3 days in a row, including the nights. So do not eat also at the nights, עם הלילות. ויהיה נחשב לו ל40 תעניות. That would be seen as 40 days of fasting. And he says you shouldn't eat meat, and you shouldn't drink wine, and you shouldn't use dvash. So for us, meaning no sugar for you. It's part of the punishment. And do not wear and only use one cloth, so it will be cold. We are speaking about Poland. And do not go to any meals, and do not go to the barber. It goes on and on and on and on and on and on. And every time in the yahrzeit of the deceased, you must fast and light a candle for his memory. And if you, it's very long. It comes down in the end to 330 days of fast. 330 days of fast. And he says, if you do all of that, then hopefully God will forgive you. And again, that's all of that is after you are making sure you are supporting the children of the deceased. So that's again a very interesting answer out of the box. There was a tradition of this type of questions and answers. So he's using here bits and pieces from the Maharam, which was his we said great father, and other Bechabrim, and it seems that he also is adding a little of his own. They are trying to hit some balance here. Obviously, I mean, again, our system is to take someone like that and throw him for 30 years in jail. Now, it has its advantages. It also has, obviously, its deficiencies. It doesn't help the children of the deceased that you threw the murder into jail. And sometimes also it may be, I think it can be argued, but arguably the community will have better ability to condemn such type of an act in this way of acting than in just throwing him into jail and we would not see him for 30 years. If you see this man every day and you see how he's being eaten by the fists and how he's expressing his sorrow, etc., 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 that may be a more educational than throwing someone into jail. And usually what happens then is that the small criminals become big criminals. So it's a complicated question. I thought it's very interesting to see his answer in this question. Okay. Here's many other answers. Again, not as many as others, as I said, as other Rabbanim in the area, but nonetheless, there's some very interesting questions and answers. Many answers, by the way, regarding Pesach. Why? Because the Jews in his area were making their living from selling beer. And, you know, they sold beer to the non-Jews. Now, on Pesach, the non-Jews are not interested in what you have problems in owing beer and selling it. They want their pub open. So it was usually what Jews were doing, were selling. That's when selling your chametz became a thing for Ashkenazi Jews back then. So he has many questions regarding people that didn't sell properly. So back then it was not as institutionalized as today. It's not that everyone came to the Rav and the Rav was making the selling, but every Jew was selling to his neighbor, to his non-Jewish neighbor. Now, sometimes there will be some mistake in the process of selling. Sometimes they wouldn't sell everything. Sometimes they didn't find, there is a question that he was asked that someone didn't find a non-Jew until the last minute. And then he just said, everything is hefker and threw away the keys. So is that considered bitul chametz? Is he allowed to use the beer after Pesach? Now that can be a question of a lot of money, And sometimes if you have lost the beer, then it's not only that you have lost the value of the beer, it's also that you would be fired. They didn't own the beer places. It was owned by the Paritz. It was owned by the Polish nobleman. And he was hiring the Jew to run the business for him. The Jew was an agent. I think we spoke about it a few times. And they would pick Jews because Jews knew to do math. They knew numbers. And they were not drinking the beer too much. So there were two good reasons why to employ a Jew to sell the beer. But that's only in case that he's making money. If he's losing all the beer, then he would be fired and then he can be in the streets. Yeah.
Why is this question around? If you own by somebody else, doesn't belong to the Jew?
No, but the beer did belong to the Jew because the nobleman didn't want to deal with the losses that may happen if the beer would somehow be spoiled or something. So all the achrayut, all the responsibility was on the Jew. The Jew was running the store. All the things in the store belonged to the Jew. If they would get broken or something, that he would have to pay to buy new ones. And then in the end of the year, the Jew would have to give a certain sum that was decided beforehand, and he can skip everything that is beyond this sum. That's usually how it works. It was called a renda. So let's say that they would decide that he needs to give $1 million every year, right? Or salty or whatever they were using there, zeruvim, golden coins. And so they would give 1 million of them every year, and everything that he earns more than that, he can keep to himself. Usually it was a good deal for the Jews. Okay. Now comes the villain. The villain in the story is a certain man that was born as Yaakov Yosef ben Yehuda Leib, but was become to be known as Yaakov Frank. Now, Yaakov Yosef ben Yehuda Leib was born in Poland in 1726. So he's 26 younger than our hero, than Rabbi Chaim Hacoehn Rapoport. And at the age of 12, he began to work as a helper to a tradesman, to a businessman, and went with him throughout the world in doing business. And he came to Turkey. And in Turkey, while he lived there, he was called Frank. by the local Jews. Why? Because he came from Europe. Europe is French, right? So every European Jew was called Frank by the local Turkish population. Now, in some ironical twist, the Jews in Europe so the people that came from Europe to Turkey were called Franks because of French. And then when they returned to Europe, they will continue to be called Franks. And then the people in Europe began using the word Frank to describe people coming from Turkey. So you were called Frank either way. Okay, fine. So that's how we became known as Jacob Frank. You can see here of Frank. You can see here that's a picture that we have of him. You can see that he's wearing a Turkish hat. That's not a Polish hat, that's a Turkish hat. Now, in Turkey, he met people that were followers of Shabtai Tzvi. Now, we are almost 100 years after that Shabtai Tzvi became Islamized, and we are 50 or 40 years after his death. Nonetheless, there are still people in Turkey, they were called the Dunme, which in Turkish means the believers. And they were keeping their faith in Shabtai Tzvi. It was a half-secret movement of people believing in Shabtai Tzvi. They were in the thousands, maybe in the tens of thousands. To this day, we do not know exactly the width of this movement. By the way, some claim that Kemal Atatürk was a descendant of the Dunme, meaning that he was half Jewish or something, and that's why he was so much against Islam. But that's a story to another time. So returning to us, Jacob Frank met with this Dunme man, and they convinced him, or maybe he wanted to be convinced, and he immediately discovered that he is able to prophesy. That is nice. So he became a prophet of Shabtai Tzvi. He later claimed that the neshama of Shabtai Tzvi, the Mashiach, is now residing in his body, which is very convenient. If you just met thousands of people that believe in Shabtai Tzvi, and you are Shabtai Tzvi, that gives you a lot of kavod. He claimed that the neshama of Shabtai Tzvi had to wait 40 years. That's as the Jews in the desert had to wander for 40 years before it could come into the promised land, which is the body of Jacob Frank. The whole thing was a lie because he was born 49 years after the death of Shabtai Tzvi, not 40 years, but he forged his date of birth. So the whole thing, Shabtai Tzvi was a sick man, but it seems that he at least believed in what he was saying. Jacob Frank was a liar. It's very important to understand that. It's a real villain we are speaking here about, a real villain from the movies. So he was a liar, he was a deceiver, he was trying to make as much money and derive as much benefits and pleasures as he can from deceiving and from taking use of the belief of people that were not very smart. So that was what he was doing. So he was able to gather thousands of followers in 17. Now he was an Am Haaretz. He was proud in that. He said, "I never learned Talmud." He was proud in being an Am Haaretz. He knew a little of Torah, not too much, a little of the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, and he knew Zohar, or at least he claimed to know Zohar. But that was his knowledge, and it's very interesting. He didn't write anything. It's not sure that he was able to write. But we have things that were wrote from his name. And he would make up things. And obviously, what he really wanted, what he said to them always is, we need to break all of the halacha. That was the most important ideology. So to break away from halacha. Now, in 1756, he comes to a certain city in Poland named Lanskoen, and he's throwing a party there with his followers. Now, the party was, I don't want to read descriptions, it was greatly improper, immodest, everything that you can imagine happened there. And what is even more shocking is that the local Rav in this Lanskoen participated in the party with his wife. And again, I don't want to go into details. Now, it seems usually they try to keep secret, but it seems they drank too much. So the whole thing spilled out. And Jews that saw that were completely shocked from what was going on there. And they reported to the police. They reported it to the police. The police arrested the people in the party. And Yaakov Frank had a Turkish citizenship. So he was just deported back to Turkey. And other Jews were detained. And then the government gave the Jews to the local Jewish community to judge them, to sentence them, because back then there was no autonomy. So the Jews were judging themselves. And then Rabbi Chaim Hacoehn gets into the picture, right? Because as the senior rabbi of the area, he is being called to give a judgment about this Frankisten, as they were called, in the Frankists. How should we relate to them? And he is investigating, and he takes testimonials about what they are doing. And again, it's shocking. The whole thing was printed by Rabbi Yaakov Emdin, and it's again, everything that you can think of. It was unbelievable. So the response was that he put everyone under the ban, which was, I guess, the usual response back then. So everyone was put under the ban and excommunicated. Their children were named Mamzerim because of, as I said, the improper behavior within the cult. You could not know if the children are the children of the father, of the husband, of the wife. So everyone was declared a mamzer, and their bread and wine became asur in eating and drinking. So basically, they were completely cut off from the Jewish community. Even some of these suspected, that's for someone that is proved to be Frankists. People that were suspected, it was enough to stop them from teaching in the local shul, or being a chazan, or being a shochet. So people lose their parnasa. Now you can imagine that some of the Frankists become very angry with Rabbi Chaim Hacoehn Rapoport and with the rabbinical establishment for cutting them off in such a shocking and devastating way. Another thing that Rabbi Chaim Hacoehn did was to declare a ban on learning Kabbalah before the age of 30. That is something that is being renewed in our history every 10 or 20 years, and that still doesn't work. People learn that in a very young age, and for some people, it just completely get them off the racks. The next scene is that the people of the cult, these Frankists, they went to the church. And they said to them, you know, we are very similar to you. We also believe that the Mashiach was already sent. We believe that the Mashiach is an incarnation of God, because that was part of what Frank taught them, which has roots in what Shabtai Tzvi already said, and that is that the Mashiach is an emanation, I guess, incarnation of God. And that's why I, Yaakov Frank, also am, of course, God, and I should be worshipped. So we are not so far from you, and we are being persecuted by the Jews just as your God was persecuted by the Jews 2,000 years ago. So you should help us against them. And now the church, obviously not because they thought that Frank was God, but because they saw here a chance to intervene in the Jewish internal affairs. The church says, yes, for sure, we would be happy to assist you. Now, the main maneuver there was a bishop named Dombovski, a very Polish name. So he was called Dombovski, or maybe Dombovski, I think Dombovski. And he was, he said, I would help you. I would help you. He made already arrangements with Yaakov Frank that after he would help them, they all will accept Christianity. But that was not revealed at the beginning of the affair. So that was like a secret agreement. Okay, fine. So I would help you. How would they help you? You, Yaakov Frank, say that the Jews are against you. You have the Torah, you have the Zohar, fine. So why the Jews are against you? Because of the Talmud, right? You, Yaakov Frank, never learned Talmud. So the problem is the Talmud. Let's do a public dispute, not with the Christians. The Christians will only judge. The dispute would be internal, Jewish internal affair between the Frankists on one hand and the rabbis on the other hand, and we would judge. So you can see how they play it to their benefit, the Christians. And in the year 1758, the dispute does take place. Obviously, the rabbis did everything they could to postpone and to duck it and to avoid it, because they knew the outcome was clear from the beginning. There was no way that the rabbis could win, and but that they were not able. They were not able in the end to cancel it. They had to come to the argument. Rabbi Chaim was also there as the head of the Jewish missionary. They were, the verdict was given after 8 days of public dispute, which caused a big chilul Hashem because it was Jews against Jews. People were buying tickets to go into the dispute. After 8 days of dispute, it was declared that the Talmud is a blasphemous book and it should be burned at the stake. Now, people were shocked because this is something that was appropriate for 500 years before in Paris in 1240. They burned the Talmud. That was in the medieval. That was in the days of dark. But now we are already enlightened. We are in 1758. It's a new world. In certain places, there is already a separation of church and state. There is a beginning of freedom of religion, not in Poland in any way, but at least do not burn the books of other religions. Nothing happened. This Dombovski was like a dog that bit into something and you will not be able to open his teeth. And certainly, indeed, in 1758, they burned the Talmud. That's the picture that we saw earlier. And that's a testimony from a Jew that was there. He says the people, now they were not able to collect the Gemarot. It's very interesting, from the rabbis themselves. So the people that collected the Sfarim were the people of Yaakov Frank. So it seems that most of the books that were burned were the books of the followers. These were Gemarot that they had from before they became followers of Yaakov Frank. And now everyone brought it to the city square, and they forced the Rabbanim to pay to the Frankists the worth of the books, because they were cheated to buy these worthless books. And they took the books and they put it into a sack, a big sack, and tied it to a horse, and the horse went throughout all of the city. I mean, they were very creative back then. So the horse would go throughout all of the city. That's in order to obviously lahashpil, right? To disgrace the Talmud, and through the garbage place till they came to the city square, where there were a big fire, and the Talyan. So the hangman of the city, he was also responsible for hanging people and for burning books. So the hangman took the Sepharim from the sack one by one, opening each one and then throwing it into the fire. That's obviously was in order to make a stance. וגאו הרבנים המשולחים וכל בני ישראל הנלווים עמהם בבכי הגדולה. As you can imagine, the rabbis were standing there and crying. So that's the scene of Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, right, of the Torah being banned. Now, there was a great fear because this Dombovski guy was becoming more and more important, but in the eyes of the church, because he was succeeding. And they made him into the bishop, the archbishop of it was called Theodelia, the whole of the state. And now that they have a verdict against the Talmud, they would be able to collect all of the Sfarim of the Talmud and burn everything. Who knows where it would stop? So they were very, very, very worried. But then something unexpected happens. A few days, 3 or 4 days after the burning of the Talmud, Dombovski was very happy, was going in his chariot around and arranging himself for the next step against the Jews. And suddenly he had, we are not sure what exactly, it seems that some kind of a stroke. And he asked to be returned to his home. He went home, they called in a doctor. The doctor said, drink a cup of wine, everything would be fine. He tried to drink the wine, but when the wine touched his lips, so he had some type again of a epilepsy. I don't know, he had some type of a stroke, as I said, and he completely lost his mind. So he was lying on the floor, mefarkes. How do you say mefarkes? Shaking, yeah, trembling. And then he began to speak about ants. He said, there are ants crawling around me. And then he said, no, these are not ants. I see the words of the books that I burned. Now that's an amazing testimony that we have. That was printed in the book, again, by Rabbi Yaakov Emdin at the time. So Rabbi Yaakov Emdin was not there. He heard from people that were there. But no one denied what he wrote and what he printed. So it's an amazing story. So he said, he says, אותיות הספרים אשר ציוויתי לשרוף, הם העומדים לפניי מלוא כל החדר. Obviously that's a translation. But he says, I see the letters of the book that I burned, and the whole room is filled with them. And he commanded his aides to go and compensate the Jews for the burned books. That we know that happened. So they did compensate them. Now, a few days later, the missionaries of the Frankists came to visit him. He was sick, and they appreciated him. So they came to see how is he doing. When he saw them, he had another seizure, and he commanded his aides to kill the head of a missionary from the Frankists that came to him. Now they were trying to prevent it. It didn't help. It didn't help. In the ensuing, you may say, anarchy that was going on there, the head of not Yaakov Frank, but the head of the local missionary was killed, and Dombovski himself died a few days later. So it's an amazing story. The whole decree, the whole Gzera was cancelled. The church decided that it steps back. I mean, Dombovski was leading the whole charge, and when he died, and then they decided they do not want to continue with the Gzera, and they stepped back. Now, again, that's a picture from the book of Rabbi Yaakov Emdin. I think I want to use it. This man, so use drawings in his Sefarim. So that's a drawing of this Dombovski getting the cup of wine just before he gets the first seizure. The second picture, I hope that you can see, it's a chariot going on a bridge. Now, according to the stories he got, one of the other heads of the Christians that were dealing with, maybe it's the hangman himself, he was on a chariot going over a bridge, and the bridge collapsed, and he fell into the water and died. So again, I'm giving you the stories as they were printed back at the day. Now, the end was not so good. Not so, I mean, it's real life. So not such a happy end. They were able to get rid of this Dombovski, and the Gzera of burning the Talmud was cancelled. However, the Frankists were extremely angry, and they felt that that was the end. That was like getting a divorce from the Jewish people. They would not be able to ever return. And they decided to use the atomic weapon. And that was, they went again to the church. This time they didn't speak about the Talmud. This time they spoke, they said that, we know, because we were Jews, that the Jews are using the blood of Christian children for their matzah. Now, that was a blood libel that was going through Europe again and again in waves, but having a Jew admitting to that, that was something that had never happened. Even the worst of the Jews never claimed that, unless under torture, but never claimed, came from their own will and admitted that they were using a Christian blood. And these Frankists came and they had proofs from the Shulchan Aruch that it says that you need to use on Pesach Yain Adom. So they says that it's not Yain Adom, you should read it Yain Edom, Edomites. The Edomites are the Christians, and Yain is blood. So they said to the Christian, you see, in the Shulchan Aruch it says that you must use Christian blood for Pesach. Now, it may sound completely stupid to us, but the Christians were not interested in how stupid it sounds. They had an admission from a Jew. So that was, that had the potential to become extremely, extremely dangerous. These type of blood libels came usually with very difficult pogroms with them. The church again asked Rabbi Chaim Hacoehn Rapoport, our hero, to come and to defend Yahadut, and he came to the argument. There is a discussion between the historians. Some say that the Baal Shem Tov was also part of this dispute. Others says that he was not part. Be it as it may, Rabbi Chaim Hacoehn Rapoport was surely there, and he was able to prove, he was able to, no, I don't know if to prove, there is nothing to prove here, but he was able to dismiss the arguments of the Frankists and to convince the new bishop to let the Jews alone. And he was able to, as I said, to defend the Jews successfully, which was one of the greatest feats, we may say, achievements of his life. Because if he would not have succeeded in that, then we would have had a great massacre in our hands. Now, he was niftar a few years later in 1771. We are already very late, so I have the will, his last will, but I would not read from inside. He left all of his money to his wife. He had about 10 children, but he left all of his money to his wife. He said, her ktuba, what I should pay to her, is greater than the sum of all of my possessions. So I give everything to her, and I ask for her mechila, for her pardon, to what I should have given her throughout life, and I couldn't. That's a very interesting will. So he left everything to his wife, and to his children, yes, they would learn this Baal Pen, this Gemara. Okay, so he gave them a very detailed list of what they should learn. Money he didn't give them, but Torah demands did. And he also asked the city, again, very, very interesting. He asked the city to continue supply his wife for the first year after his death. Although that he is not around anymore, so he's not the rabbi, please continue to pay the salary and give her the house, because you know how hard I and she worked for you throughout all of these years. And as far as we know, they granted the request. And I think it's beautiful. It's beautiful to see that this man, with all the great things that he did, and international and as we say today, interfaith, nonetheless, in the crucial minutes, he knew to give the kavod and the money and the support to his wife, who enabled him throughout his life to do everything that he did. And with that, we finish in the prayer that just as the Reshaim back then got the punishment, so all the Reshaim of the world would be dealt with what they deserve, and the Kadosh Baruch Hu would turn these days of fast and of mourning into days of happiness and celebration. Thank you.